From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A grand juror in Georgia goes on a media tour hinting at possible indictments, including maybe of Donald Trump. Plus, new data Friday shows that the Fed's favorite inflation measure is moving upward. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues on the editorial board, Kate Batchelder-Odell and Monet Ukwe-Barua. Welcome and happy Friday to you and to one and all. A special grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia, which is Atlanta, spent nearly 8 months investigating the aftermath of the state's 2020 election and whether there could have been criminal interference with it. Many listeners will probably recall President Trump's taped phone call with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, where he denied that he had lost Georgia and urged state officials to find about 12,000 votes. This special grand jury was solely meant to investigate and make recommendations, so there are no charges yet on the table. But this week, the forewoman of the grand jury, Emily Kohrs, went on a strange media tour, speaking with reporters at NBC, CNN, the Associated Press, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the New York Times. Here's how she replied when she was asked on CNN if the grand jury recommended criminal charges against President Trump.
I really don't want to share something that the judge made a conscious decision not to share. I will tell you that it was a process where we heard his name a lot. We definitely heard a lot about former President Trump, and we definitely discussed him a lot in the room. And I will say that when this list comes out, there are no major plot twists waiting for you.
And here she is on NBC saying she was a little disappointed that the grand jury didn't get testimony from President Trump.
Honestly, I kind of wanted to subpoena the former president because I got to swear everybody in. And so I thought it'd be really cool to get 60 seconds with President Trump of me looking at him and being like, do you solemnly swear? And me getting to swear him in. I kind of just thought that would be an awesome moment.
Kate, I don't even know what to say here. I mean, the ideal of Lady Justice, the woman in the blindfold, it seems that she demands better than this.
Yeah, Kyle, this is a painful episode and sort of a live demonstration of America's crisis in civic education. To have someone here not treating their duties on the grand jury with particular care. Now, there are some distinctions here that some are trying to make, that she's not talking about the deliberations of the grand jury, but her own experiences. But there's some really muddy waters there. I mean, she told CNN, I will be frustrated if nothing happens. This was too much information, too much of my time, too much of everyone's time. That is borderline there, putting her thumb on the scale for what she expects to happen here. And the irony, of course, is that, and Trump has said, he'll use it to try to swat down any indictments. Now, another grand jury would have to proffer those indictments, but nonetheless, this makes it look like a case where someone had a particular outcome in mind. I think in reality here, we're dealing with somebody who's not very sophisticated in talking to the media and is in over her head talking about what she thinks is just the most exciting thing that's ever happened to her. But I do think that to the extent that anybody wants a certain outcome here with Trump, this works well against it and will taint the process and make people think that he didn't get a fair shake or that this wasn't a serious enterprise.
I agree with Kate that it seems like she is in over her head, but it does seem to me, I haven't looked at the Georgia grand jury rules and laws on secrecy enough to know if this is technically breaking them or technically not. But there are all sorts of quotes where she seems to be talking pretty clearly about what happened in the grand jury room. Not only when she said in the clip we played a moment ago that the grand jury talked about, that they heard a lot about President Trump. Here's a couple quotes from her. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution interview. We heard a lot of recordings of President Trump on the phone. It is amazing how many hours of footage you can find of that man on the phone. Some of these that were privately recorded by people or recorded by a staffer. She apparently talked to reporters extensively about witnesses. And this is from the New York Times write-up. Apparently, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham came in, and Ms. Kohrs asked him whether it was too early in the year, this was Thanksgiving, whether it was too early in the year for her to wear a Santa hat. His response, she said, absolutely not. And one more, this again is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She said the late Georgia House Speaker David Ralston cracked her up. She said she swore him in holding a Ninja Turtle popsicle she had just received at an ice cream party thrown by the DA's office. And Monet, keep in mind, this is a serious thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about citizens getting together and making a recommendation to a district attorney whether fellow American citizens should be criminally charged and put on trial and maybe sent to prison. And this seems to show a bizarre lack of seriousness about what the grand jury was actually up to.
Exactly. I definitely think that you and Kate have done a great job skewering Emily Kohrs' seriousness, so I'm not going to comment too much on the popsicle and the Santa hat. I think our audience can make their own minds up about that. But I do think there is a more serious harm to the media tour that she's doing. Obviously, as Kate said, it's possible that the Trump team is preparing to use her statements to the press as evidence that there was very little seriousness involved in the process, that there was a collection of jurors making recommendations to the district attorney who already had it out for Trump and basically wanted to participate in this media spectacle of hanging him up on these bogus election interference charges. I do think that there's not too strong evidence that that is going to weigh on the actual legal process if and when the district attorney of Fulton County does convene the actual grand jury and potentially move forward with charges. It doesn't seem as if Emily Kohrs has breached any protocol that would taint the entire process, but it is something that could influence other people who are reviewing the evidence and who already have reason to be skeptical about whether the process is fair. And I also think that, frankly, in the same way that the Trump team now believes the process is biased, you now have a lot of people who have heard this foreperson on the special grand jury go on a media tour basically telling everyone to expect charges coming for Trump and for others. And so if that doesn't happen, if for any reason the district attorney of Fulton County decides not to charge Trump, a lot of people might feel as if there was some kind of change of heart in the DA, or they'll feel as if they've been snookered, basically, and will be very, very confused and very disappointed. And so it seems like no matter what the outcome here, it was not helpful for this foreperson to be airing the internal proceedings of the grand jury.
To underline the point on the legal vulnerability here, I'm not an attorney, and I've seen different commentators taking different positions on how much this actually jeopardizes any potential case. On one hand, as we already said, this was a special grand jury that was convened to investigate and make some recommendations. Now it goes to Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who will make the ultimate call on whether to bring some sort of charge. That will go through a separate grand jury. So there is some sort of insulation here between this forewoman and the eventual charges if we get them. On the other hand, here's a quote from former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid. She's writing on MSNBC and pointing to, believe it or not, the popsicle incident. And she says, "Why on earth would grand jurors be socializing with the prosecutors? A grand jury is an independent body, and prosecutors are trained to maintain a professional distance and avoid engaging in interactions that could be perceived as influencing their decisions." And so I don't know, Kate, whether this is a real legal vulnerability, but it does seem certain that if there are charges brought against President Trump or his aides, his advisors in 2020, it seems pretty likely to me that they are going to make that argument. And maybe it doesn't work in court, but maybe it works in the court of public opinion, which is also important as we talk about charging potentially a former president and a current presidential candidate.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, I think you're talking loosely about the legal vulnerabilities, but to your point, the political vulnerabilities really matter here as well. You keep in mind that there is a constituency in the country that has, I think, valid concerns about how elections are conducted and whether they're fair and whether there's substantial fraud. And we want the proceedings around these inquiries to be something that the public can have confidence in. For instance, this woman has been saying on TV, we found that there was no fraud. And that's, of course, consistent with our reporting as well. But we want a finding like that to be taken seriously by the country. So when you have a show like this with the Santa hats and the Ninja Turtles and all the other follies, it really undermines the seriousness of the enterprise. Also, I'd just add, we wouldn't be having this same kind of valorizing or normalizing this kind of behavior if it were a grand jury for anyone other than Donald Trump. And so I do think that there are some real political vulnerabilities here. And I think the wisest course of action, as we've discussed, would be for this to be settled by voters on whether they think he is worth electing again, as opposed to trying to indict somebody who is actively running for the presidency. I think the case for an indictment was weak to begin with. And after this episode is weaker now.
District Attorney Fani Willis has said she has not made up her mind yet on whether to bring any charges. A piece of the special grand jury's report was released by the judge, but not any piece that involves or describes any indictment recommendations. Fani Willis has said that her decision is imminent, but who knows what imminent means in this context.